I will lead you to victory again. That was Boris Johnson's appeal to backbench Tory MPs this afternoon as he gave the speech of his political life, urging them to back him in tonight's confidence vote and warning against what he called a pointless fratricidal debate. But after months of bitter division and recrimination over Partygate, his detractors can barely contain their fury, and their numbers have been steadily mounting, while Mr Johnson's supporters are insisting even if he wins by a single vote, it will be enough. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me. Gary.
A number of issues sort of flowing around today. One of them is the timing of this. Did the rebels tip accidentally, prematurely, into a vote? Did they not have enough forces mustered to make sure that when they shoot, they properly knock out the Prime Minister or mortally wound him? Interestingly, though, as the day has gone on, some of those rebels have been feeling a little more confident. They don't think they're going to win this vote. They don't think they're going to get 180, 50% of the MPs, but they do think they could well be approaching numbers which mean that they mortally wound the Prime Minister. He's gone for a very early vote, as fast as possible. I mean, rushing people into Westminster today for this vote at 6 o'clock. The key question is what numbers do actually wound the Prime Minister. Now, we've got a number of precedents to look at here. One of them, which an awful lot of people are preoccupied by, is the 37% of the vote that went against Theresa May when she had a vote of no confidence. An awful lot of the people who are around the Prime Minister now were amongst those who said, right, that's it, she's finished. So will he get above 37% of the vote? And that magic number there, to keep an eye on, is 133. I've spoken to a lot of number crunchers today in the party, people who are very seasoned watchers of this party, and they've said today they think that the rebel numbers could be in the margin of 120, a floor of 120, and up to perhaps 145. One of the great unknowns here is what is called the payroll vote. The people, most of them are actually salaried, although they're called payroll, the people who have jobs in government, appointments in government and jobs in government. Are some of those quietly, even though they're holding on to their jobs, going to do the dirty on Boris Johnson and vote against him? And in the last few minutes, we've heard that one Parliamentary Private Secretary, an unpaid aide to the Foreign Secretary, as it happens, Scottish MP John Lamont, has resigned in order to vote against the Prime Minister. How many others, though, won't necessarily see that as something they should do? You talked about the Prime Minister giving the speech of his life to MPs just now. Some of them thought it actually wasn't his best work. He said the best is yet to come, a promise which is harder and harder to give as time goes by. He also said at one point, 4 MPs have said they heard him say this in the room, when he was talking about attending leaving dues as part of the Partygate scandal, he said, "I'd do it again." That left a lot of people scratching their heads. Who knows, it may even have shifted some opinion. We all have about 2 hours to wait.
No wonder he was looking at his phone. Just before he took his seat at Sunday's Jubilee pageant, Boris Johnson was told he faced a vote of no confidence. He was stuck in his seat for 3 hours, knowing that this morning would bring the sight Tory leaders dread.
It's been a long time. Well, there's a lot of speculation, hasn't it? So,
as the backbench chairman announced a vote of no confidence.
You're looking at that camera directly. Yep.
I notified the Prime Minister yesterday that the threshold had been reached, and we agreed the timetable.
So did some of them post-date their letters so as not to interrupt the Jubilee?
I think that's not a bad description of what was taking place.
How many Prime Ministers tolerated? For that alone, no admiration is high enough.
The Jubilee had paused but couldn't stop the process. Some think it may even have fuelled Tory MPs, nervous their vote-winning Prime Minister had become a loser.
People will have been influenced by that. It's unprecedented for a Conservative Prime Minister to be booed outside a service to celebrate the Queen's service to our nation.
I will be supporting Boris Johnson and backing Boris.
MPs loyal to the Prime Minister were urged to tweet their support. By lunchtime, 82 of them had done so.
Despite all the odds against us in Parliament and the Remainers and the media, he delivered Brexit.
There is a policy agenda that speaks to my part of the country in Mansfield, which is at the forefront for the first time ever, and that comes from the Prime Minister. If he goes, there is absolutely no saying whether that agenda stays, and that agenda is the most important thing for my constituents. So I'll back him, and I think he will win.
Is this the beginning of the...
Cabinet ministers loyal to the Prime Minister toured the studios and scorned the motives of those trying to unseat Boris Johnson.
Most people who want to get rid of the Prime Minister are people who always rejected the result of the British people in 2016.
Sounds like you do think it's a Remainer plot.
No, I think a lot of Remainers are involved.
Boris Johnson's team were particularly fired up when his rival for the leadership 3 years ago, Jeremy Hunt, tweeted, "Today's decision is change or lose. I will be voting for change."
He stood for leadership last time and I seem to remember didn't succeed.
Do you think he's the candidate for change?
That really does make the mind boggle. I think he's the establishment figure.
The Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries, put the boot in with a tweet claiming, as Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt had told her, we had to handle the pandemic like China and remove people testing positive from their own homes. Those wanting the Prime Minister toppled said bitterness like this would boost the numbers for their revolt. And they disputed government claims that Boris Johnson only needs to win by 1 MP and he can stay put.
The government's going to have to do some very difficult things in the coming year or two. You know, we're looking at the whole world's looking at a stagflation crisis.
You don't think Boris Johnson will be able to get things through Parliament?
And I think there will be some very controversial pieces of legislation and controversial policies.
And he won't be in command of his party?
And I think there will be a problem with command of the party, I do think.
So one isn't enough at all? One isn't enough at all?
No, I don't think one's enough.
Even if he wins by 1, that this is it and it's back to business. And the people who lose need to accept that this has been lost.
But when 45% of Margaret Thatcher's MPs voted no confidence in her, she had to resign 1 week later. A much smaller 34% of Tory MPs voted no confidence in John Major in 1995. He told aides that number was very close to being not survivable, though he held on to the general election defeat. 37% of Tory MPs voted no confidence in Theresa May in December 2018. She survived, wounded, then resigned 7 months later. Many have fixed on that 37% figure as a hurdle Boris Johnson must clear. That would mean he'd have to keep the votes against him below 133.
This is a slow death, even if it's not instant death.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem.
The precedents so far are that anybody who wins by a bit doesn't last for very much longer afterwards.
John Penrose was the only resignation today from an unpaid position as anti-corruption czar. He said the Prime Minister should have resigned over Partygate. Key to the Prime Minister's fortunes could be how many who've stayed inside government might, in the privacy of a secret ballot, vote against the boss.
You look around the Cabinet table, hand on heart, can you be quite sure there won't be a couple of votes or so going in, voting no confidence against the Prime Minister from the Cabinet?
I can't give you a single name of a person who would do that.
You struggle with that?
I would struggle with that.
Quite a few people I've spoken to didn't struggle at all.
Well, I work with these people on a daily basis.
2 Loyalist MPs from the 2019 intake await their leader's fate. The drama he knew was coming as he watched the parades go by now grips all his party and the nation.
Well, with me now is the Brexit Opportunities Minister, and it's fair to say I think ardent Boris Johnson supporter, Jacob Rees-Mogg. The truth is, win or lose, he's a dead man walking now, isn't he?
No, that's clearly not true. That this is part of the process that goes on within the Conservative Party. There's a clear set of rules. If he wins, he remains leader of the party and he remains Prime Minister. Right,
but you remember calling for Theresa May to quit, even though she won. A win wasn't a win then, and it's not a win today either, is it?
You're absolutely right, and you're right to remind me of what I said. But when I said that, everybody said to me, friends and non-friends, said that I was wrong on 2 counts. First of all, it wasn't the generous response to a result, and secondly, it wasn't democratic, that 1 is enough. And that was what was proved, that coincidence is not causality. So yes, Theresa May went a few months later, but that was because she lost 3 meaningful votes, the first of them by the biggest margin in House of Commons history. So it was her inability to command the House of Commons, not the internal Conservative Party mechanisms that led to Mrs May's, or Lady May as she now is, resignation.
But you really think it's credible to continue when you have scores of MPs on your own side who don't just sort of lack confidence in you? They think you're a bad person, a lot of them. They think you're unfit to be Prime Minister. The wrong kind of person to lead this country. I mean, that's not tenable for the long term. Maybe you can stagger on for a few months, but I mean, it's over at some point before the next election.
If we look around Central Lobby and we look at the political figures here in Marble, they all had people who thought they weren't suitable leaders. They all had their opponents. That is the lot of politics. Robert Walpole had people who fundamentally disapproved of him, and he went on for 21 years. That the truth is that all politicians and all parties have opponents within those parties. The truth with Boris Johnson is that he got a mandate from the British people. That's why he's got a majority of 80, particularly to deliver on Brexit and the referendum in 2016. That's what underpins his position and his support.
But you must be very uncomfortable with the reality of what he's delivered. The economy's a mess. Brexit is causing huge problems in Northern Ireland. I mean, when you see Jesse Norman's letter this morning, an intelligent man, not sort of prone to hysterical fits or anything like that, I mean, this is a very measured demolition of what Boris Johnson has actually delivered.
I don't actually think that's right. That in his letter, Mr. Norman seemed to be against vast swathes of the manifesto on which he had stood for election. So the Conservatives stood for election saying they would control immigration. Jesse came up with no solution for that. He just doesn't like what's being done.
You were going to ship people off to Rwanda.
We said we were going to deal with immigration, which hasn't yet been possible. So that is a sensible, thought-through scheme. Mr. Norman had no solution for that. He was complaining about the Northern Ireland Protocol in the Union.
But it would be illegal.
What we're doing is protecting the Union to ensure that Northern Ireland is treated as a full member of the United Kingdom, not as a semi-detached member, which is the effect that protocol.
But he and many of his colleagues think you're actually putting the Union at risk, and that this is not Conservative, because you're a Conservative and Unionist party.
I think he's fundamentally wrong, and if you look at the opinion polls in Scotland, the support for separation has gone down in the last 15 months or so. So something must be working in terms of support for the Union. So look at what's happening, and you mentioned the economy. You say the economy is in difficulties. Well, there is a global inflation. We know that, and inflation figures in some other countries are worse than in the UK. But we had a pandemic, and the pandemic cost £408 billion. Which bit of that expenditure, which companies would you not have supported? Which jobs would you not have supported with furlough schemes? Because that's the question you've got to ask if you don't like the economic management.
So are you really now a fan of high tax and high spend?
No, but
because that's what you've done, isn't it?
What I support is the expenditure that was necessary to see us through the pandemic. That we had to do things that had never previously been tried by governments. Because look at the airlines now and the problems they are having. Those problems would be afflicting the whole of the economy even more if the furlough scheme had not been there to protect jobs and the bounce-back loans to protect businesses. So economically, it was the right thing to do, and the situation would be much worse if it hadn't been done.
You've also been out today suggesting this is all about Brexit, and that's nonsense,
yes.
Isn't it?
No.
Because David Davis was a Brexiteer.
You can point to one or two Brexiteers. But actually, at the heart of this was given away by Tobias Ellwood, who said what he wanted was to go back into the single market. The mainstay of opposition to the Prime Minister is from disgruntled Remainers. And that's clear from the senior people. Look at Jeremy Hunt coming out today, somebody who never wanted to leave the European Union, who lost the previous election when he stood against Boris Johnson, and wants to have another go, but is essentially a disgruntled Remainer.
And you now have internecine warfare between Jeremy Hunt, Nadine Dorris, some of you piling in slightly less vigorously than Nadine Dorris, but still, I mean...
Nadine is absolutely marvellous, and Nadine and I get on like a house on fire. But you see some things she said about me in the past. So
she doesn't really mean it, is that what you mean? Right.
No, but Nadine involves herself in robust and vigorous debate and speaks her mind, and that's terrific.
But now you've got open blue-on-blue warfare.
You always have a pop at politicians when they don't say what they think. When Nadine
it's
says
delightful.
What she thinks, you have a go at her for...
No, I'm not having a go at her. I'm just saying we can now see how exposed you are as a divided party.
When you have a leadership contest, of course people phrase themselves colourfully, and Nadine always does that brilliantly. But Jeremy Hunt is a very respectable figure in my view. He's just wrong about Brexit, and he's wrong about wanting the leadership.
So if this defeat is worse than Theresa May's, you still think that's fine?
One is enough.
It's not really, though. I mean, I know you say that, but obviously that's rubbish.
I think Channel 4 was very good when it did the cricket a few years ago and did the 2005 Ashes. Had we won the last test in the Ashes series
by
one run, and we had lost the previous game by an innings, but that meant we won 3-2, we would have won the Ashes, and we wouldn't have said, you wouldn't have said, come on Australia, you take the Ashes because we think overall it's not good enough.
It's not a game of cricket, though, is it? It's the future of the country.
It's following the rules, that's the important thing. And the rules say quite clearly, and they could have been written differently. Bear in mind when Margaret Thatcher lost, the rules said you had to win by a 15% margin. They don't say that. They say you have to win. If the Prime Minister wins by 1, that is enough.
What will you miss most about being in the Cabinet?
Oh, I don't mind being in the Cabinet. I mind about supporting Boris Johnson. Look at my backbench record. I was willing to speak my mind, and I'm happy to serve a leader I support. But I'm not grubbing around for a job. I'm supporting a great man.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's see what happens.